So what I'd like to do, if anybody is willing, is to ask, what brought you here today? What made you feel like talking about different green options for caring for bodies after death felt important to you? If anybody would share what brought them.
Sure. I'm Juliana in Denver. I'm doing my will. Well, I'm learning a lot about how to do a will, but and I haven't decided yet because I don't know enough about donating your body to science and how that works, and if the leftovers go for green burial or they just, So, but I'm very interested in green burials. I think cemeteries are like atrocious in terms of land space, and I'm originally from Europe, and it's common practice there that the graves are recycled after X amount of years, and then the bones are put in a place. So at least where I'm from, and I just think our culture is so it's back in the prohibition times, about many things, and death including. Well, actually, they were more open then. They had television, they had the dead bodies. We've kind of gone, to the other side of that. That's not the right term. So that's why I'm interested, and I'm interested if you have cancer and you put all this toxic stuff in your body and you do a green burial, then what are we doing to the earth?
Okay, so let's start with some definitions. So a green burial, and I'm going to share my screen real fast, and I'm going to take it off at times too, because it's annoying to look at this stuff that much. So a green burial, what that really means is no embalming, a biodegradable casket, or if the cemetery doesn't require a casket, because those rules are really cemetery rules, then you could have no casket. So that's what green burial is. So in the case, like if you donate your body to science, you really can't have a green burial, because when you donate your body to science, your body is embalmed, and when they're done with it, they typically cremate, and they give back the cremated remains to your loved ones. Sometimes it could be several weeks, sometimes it could be several years. I am a big believer, if you want to donate your body to science, to do that with like the anatomical board. So if you donate your body to the CU anatomical board, your body will be embalmed, and it will be cared for or used by actual medical students at Colorado University Medical Center. If you give your body to a for-profit company, and there are several, there's one called Science Care, there's one called Life Care. If you donate your body to them, your body will be embalmed, and then it will be sold. And so they make a lot of money off of your body, and you get a free cremation out of it. And that's sometimes why people do it. And also those organizations are not very upfront about the fact that they're selling the body versus that they're using it at the medical center. So most people don't know that. And most people don't know that there would be embalming. And if you are embalmed, you couldn't really be buried in a green way, because you've already put all those chemicals into the body. Does that make sense, Juliana? Yeah. So there are so many green options, and Colorado is getting more and more green options. So there is green burial, like we've talked about, and there are many cemeteries that would allow, every cemetery would allow you to be buried in a biodegradable casket. Every cemetery would allow you to be buried with no embalming. So right there, you've got green. And then there is like there's a whole spectrum of what's green. So the greenest isn't really available in Colorado, at least not yet. The greenest would be burial in a conservation easement. that exists I think it's in Madison, Wisconsin. They have that. There are probably some others, but I'm not super familiar. There has been a lot of talk of doing one in Colorado. I've heard of talk of doing it in Fort Collins, but I don't believe it's happened. Vanessa, do you know anything different that it's happened? Okay. So, so I don't think we have a conservation easement cemetery here. Then the next phase would be burial in a cemetery that doesn't allow for a vault. So a vault is a liner. Often it's cement, it can be bronze. I mean, there are lots of ways to do it. And it's really a requirement of the cemetery. It's not really about laws, at least in Colorado. In some states you are required, but not in Colorado. And some cemeteries do require it. And it would be really about holding up the ground. So it makes it easier for the cemetery to be maintained. When you're buried and your body and your casket and stuff start to decompose, it creates a vacuum that sucks the ground down. And so a cemetery might require a vault so that they don't have to keep filling the grave. And that is sort of a way to think about it in terms of the greenness of it, is maybe having a vault there, especially if you did just one that's like the lid of a butter dish and the casket still rested on the ground, or if there were no casket, your body would rest on the ground and go back to the earth. Maybe that is a green way to do it because they don't have to keep refilling the grave. So these are all things to think about, and to think about what's the most meaningful to me, what makes a difference for me. The thing that you said, Juliana, about space concerns, in Europe, that really is an issue. In the United States, that's really not an issue. We have so much space. And so cemeteries are laid out on such an efficient grid that I have been told that if every single person in the world died at the same time and they were all buried, it would take up no more than the state of New York. So in the United States, we have plenty of space for burial. And one thing to think about is if you're buried in a cemetery in a green way, that cemetery cannot be used for building. And that's actually, in a green sense, a good thing because it maintains green space. So it is a park. You know, I don't know if you live in the Denver area, but like Fairmont on Alameda and Quebec is an arboretum. And people go there, they have picnics there. I meet friends for walks a lot. I know a ton of people who bike ride through there. A lot of people I grew up with got taught to drive there. So it really can be a wonderful place. And it does make it so there can't be a strip mall. And if we want to maintain things in a more environmentally friendly way, that actually is really important. Oh, Kat just said she goes geocaching there. I love that you geocache. My husband's really into that too. Juliana, I am with Feldman Mortuary on 17th and York. So there is a lot to think about in terms of green. And if you want to be buried, there really are good ways, and your body literally does become compost. And your body literally does feed the earth, and it's going to become bushes and trees and grass. And that composting is being done in the plot. Okay, so that's in a green burial. Does that all make sense? Or if you have questions, please raise your hand.
I think the only question I have is, you know, how protected is the law that it would never be built on? It's really cool to hear that because I've never heard, you know, that concept before. But yeah, because, you know, Cheeseman, and, you know, I mean, in terms of future generations. And why would you not, and if I donated my body, it would be to a teaching hospital, no pay, no money, you know, do whatever you want with the body, I'm gone.
Yeah.
But why would you personally, if you wouldn't mind, not do that as opposed to a green burial? Other than I never thought about, it's never going to be built on, if it's really never going to be built on.
So, Juliana, one of the things, and this is not a class about ritual, but I often teach a class about ritual. One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about is this is much more than there is a dead body, we got to get rid of the dead body. So if we just feel like there's a dead body, we got to get rid of the dead body, donating it, and wait, let me just say this in a different way. Donating your body to science is a completely valid choice. And if that's your choice, that's a great one to make, especially if you're doing it the way that you are, where it's not, it's a great choice. However, what I think a lot about is bereavement and what happens to people after you're gone. And it's that there is a great benefit to burying our loved ones, which, as Thomas Lynch says, he's an incredible poet and funeral director. He calls himself an undertaker, actually. Thomas Lynch says that burial takes our loved ones from where they are to where they need to be. And in that process, we are taken from where we are to where we need to be. So the burial is actually super helpful in processing grief. So that's where I'm a big believer in green burial. In my mind, that is the gold standard. It is environmentally very good, and it gives our loved ones a way to process our death and to start creating their new normal. Cemeteries are also very important as far as creating ancestry, to know about our ancestry. Like you mentioned that you're from Europe. How many of us, when we go on vacation to somewhere in Europe, we're going to go to cemeteries? Or I get a million calls at Feldman Mortuary for people who say, in 1942, you buried my grandmother. What more can you tell me about her? And if you're not buried, that doesn't exist usually. Headstones are actually very, very, very important for developing ancestry. And I am a big believer that having our dead closer to us is really important. Like what you mentioned about, years ago, death was a much more present thing. And now death occurs in a hospital almost entirely, even though most people don't want that. And it's very far away from us, although it feels a little bit different with COVID. It feels a little more present. But people really don't want to acknowledge that our life is finite. They don't want to embrace that fact. They want to think of it as a failure. And that, I think, really does reflect on how we treat the living. And so I think it's just really important to think about this. And it's not just somebody's dead, we got to get rid of the dead body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I kind of relate because I relate it to myself because I only have 3 relatives in this country. And death to me is a really big spiritual thing. And I don't need a place and I don't need a grave. I personally don't need that. But I know that that's far from the masses. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think, Juliana, a lot of people say, I don't need it. I believe you. I don't think the dead needs it. I think the living who love that dead person might need it.
Oh, I say I don't need it for people that I really love. I just had.
Oh, you're not talking about your own self. You're talking about you.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. And I appreciate you clarifying. So a lot of people don't want to have a plot. So there are other options. So the first thing I just want to remind you is that green burial is composting, but it's in a plot. Now in Colorado, there's a new thing that is composting outside a plot. And I'm going to show you that. Hang on, I'm going to share this again. So I'm going to show you, how many of you have heard about natural organic reduction? Vanessa has. So natural organic reduction is it's not a new way of taking care of a body. It's been used in agriculture for years and years and years and years, but it is newly available to take care of humans. You might have heard of Recompose. That's kind of the brand name of one of the companies that started it, Katrina Spade. She was studying to be an architect, and for her master's thesis, she came up with something called the Urban Death Project. And at the beginning of it, she was really thinking of like building this tower that bodies would just get placed in, and then they would compost, and then you'd take out the compost and you'd put in more bodies in. Well, she stopped that idea because that probably wouldn't fly with most people. And she came up with this natural organic reduction in a vessel. So this is an artist rendering. I have seen some of the vessels that are being used in this case, and they don't look like this. This is very beautiful. The ones I saw actually look like a chest freezer. And the body is placed inside along with, with wood chips and alfalfa. And there's a really good use of air in that container. And the air, along with the microbes in our intestines, decompose the body. And they decompose it very, very quickly. In fact, in about 30 days, everything has turned to soil. All the bones, all the teeth, everything. If you have implants or things like that, those won't decompose, and they'll just get kind of, pulled out of this. And what comes out at the end is about a truck bed full of compost, full of soil. So it's really a lot. It takes about 30 days to do that. At that point, the soil is still too kind of hot to be used in any kind of planting. So it has to cure for about 60 days, for another 30 days. So for a total of 60 days, a family can take some of the compost, or they could take all of it if they have a place for it, but keeping in mind it's a whole truck bed full. So it's really a lot. And you wouldn't want to plant a tree directly in it. It's too much. So it's really like just mulch that you want to put on top of it. And so thinking about how much would be beneficial, I don't know, you really have to think about that. Currently, it is only being done in Washington State. I know of 2 organizations that are doing it, Recompose and another organization called Return Home. We are actually actively in conversation. I mean Feldman Mortuary, are actively in conversation with these organizations because it will take some time to create a place to do it here. But we are talking about if somebody wanted it, we could send them to Washington State to have this done. We really can't ship back 500 pounds of compost, except if somebody really wants it, I guess we could, but it would be very, very, very expensive to do that. But it can be done. That if you would like your body to be turned into soil, it can happen, and it can happen now. So that is something to keep in mind. And we need to come up with rituals that are going to go around this. I mean, it really could be that somebody would treat it almost like a cremation, where you would have maybe a memorial service with the body present, and then the body would get sent to Washington, or when we develop it here, we do it here. And I have been thinking that the carbon footprint of the flight could be sort of problematic in thinking about something being green, but that flight's going to go whether you're on it or not. And so if you really want to be turned into compost outside of a plot, you can. What are some questions about that?
Okay, I'm hogging it up.
You're
It's
willing to speak. I
I always
appreciate.
have a million questions, yeah, about everything. I have so much to learn, and I need to live another 100 years. But what about certain illnesses? I know viruses, all those things kind of die, but I don't know about certain illnesses and the toxicity that it would create in the soil.
Yeah, so this has been studied deeply. Our earth is meant to do this. This is like burial in the ground. Our earth is meant to decompose stuff. And so if you're buried in a plot in a green way, the earth is going to handle the things that are in our bodies. Embalming, it can't handle so well, and the embalming fluid goes into the groundwater and stuff, so it's not great. But the natural organic reduction has been studied deeply, and it gets rid of everything. It gets rid of everything. So, anything in our body, there's no DNA left. There's no bacteria that shouldn't be there left. There aren't viruses left. I mean, this has really been studied. And so it's very safe to do it. Interestingly, and I think this is more about an ick factor than anything else, in the state of Washington and in Colorado, the law says that compost cannot be used for food. And again, it's not about fear that it will cause infection or something like that. It really is about, oh gosh, that's grandma. I don't want grandma growing my corn. But it's not grandma anymore. I mean, there is not DNA left. So it is not grandma. It is literally soil that, the body becomes. And if you want to learn more, I know online that there are white papers about this. And so maybe we can find some to send out, when we send out the notes from today. And I'm not a scientist, and so I'm not going to jump in deep on that. But I do know that it has been studied very deeply. I'm not sure if Oregon, which just legalized it, and I believe California is on deck to legalize it, if their rules are the same, but I would assume they probably are. And again, it's just this ick factor of, I don't want a human body being used to grow my food. Yes, Vanessa.
So I have a question. So if you're talking about the greenest of green burials and comparing it to this, so is the only difference that natural organic reduction is in like a contained vessel of sorts so that happens faster, or how, with the alfalfa and the wood chips and stuff, as opposed to green burial where it's just nature takes its course? How long does that usually take? What are the differences?
So I think it takes a couple of years for it in the ground. And I would say there's no reason we can't put alfalfa and wood chips into your casket. The problem, I think, is more about the air circulation. So the air circulation is going to be less underground, but it is the same thing. It really is the same thing. But a lot of people who would want to do the natural organic reduction versus a green burial are really like feeling like, I don't need a plot. My loved ones don't need a plot. I don't want to spend the money on a plot. I think that's probably a big driver for people. And I think what Juliana said at the beginning, that the vast majority of people I talk to will say, I don't want to be buried. That's a terrible use of space. But they don't understand that it is not, in this country, we're not running out of space, and they don't understand the efficiency of the grid, like what we've talked about. And what's super interesting when they typically say this is then they say, so I'm going to have a fire cremation, which is not good for the earth at all. So a fire cremation has a very high carbon footprint to make it happen. Your body is in an oven at a temperature of about 1800 degrees. And so that takes a lot of resources. And a retort, so that's the name for the oven, allows the things in our body to go right up into the atmosphere. And so in your mercury in your fillings, if you have silicone implants, whatever, that's going up into the environment. And as we've learned, burning is not good. You know how we used to burn leaves and trash? We don't do that anymore. We compost. So the one method of taking care of a body, well, there's two methods that are not environmentally friendly. Traditional Christian burial. So traditional Christian burial would be your body is embalmed, it's placed in a metal casket, it's placed in a metal vault. That's environmentally going to be the worst. Then fire cremation. And all of these are really kind of on par. Some people would say that green burial would be not as green as the others, not as green as natural organic reduction, or what I'm going to talk about, alkaline hydrolysis in a second, because of the land use. I have a mixed view of that. And from a grief perspective, I think that it's really important to have a burial if you're inclined to do that. So we got to weigh out all the things that matter to us. You know, we have a lot of values, and we want to see what's going to best meet our values, which is really why we need to be planning ahead so we can think through all these things. And we can decide what is best for us along with the people who love us. You know, we can decide what is best for us as the person who would be dead and for the people who love us for their bereavement. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is water cremation, also known, hang on one second, also known as alkaline hydrolysis, also known as aquamation, has a lot of names. And this is similar to fire cremation in that you get cremated remains. Oh, I didn't say one thing about fire cremation. So you know what we think of as ash? We think that our body burns off and it becomes ash. That's not true. So our body is mostly water. And when it's put in the retort, in the fire, most of our tissue dissolves. It just evaporates. And then what's left is bone that gets ground. And that's what we think of as ash. So in a water reduction scenario, water cremation, alkaline hydrolysis, aquamation, the body is placed in this vessel. It's a big metal tube that's filled with water. Then an alkali is added. The alkali is similar to liquid soap. So that's put in here, and it's agitated a little bit, and heat is applied, but not fire, just heat in the water. And in a few hours, depending on which kind of machine you have, it's reduced to bone. So just like in a fire cremation scenario, the bone is then processed, and you'd have cremated remains and what we would think of as ash. What's really great with alkaline hydrolysis is that there are no emissions. The carbon footprint is pretty low. I mean, there's definitely some energy used to heat the water, but it's not a super high temperature. And then the solution that comes out is actually beneficial to the environment. That solution is a really wonderful fertilizer. And in fact, one of the organizations that's doing water cremation in the Denver area is called Be a Tree. And Emily Nelson, who owns it, is calling the solution tree tea. And the solution is actually delivered to a flower farm. So it goes to cut flowers. And it really grows them beautifully. And the cremated remains are also a fertilizer. So unlike in fire cremation, where something kind of happens with the burning that makes the cremated remains toxic to plants, these cremated remains actually feed plants. So this is a really good choice. And it's readily available. And you don't have to get on a plane for it now. So it really is a good, it's a way better choice than fire cremation. It is a little bit more expensive than fire cremation. And one of the things that I ought to point out is that Colorado does not have a lot of laws around this. Anybody can get into funeral service. We're the only state in the nation that doesn't require a funeral director to be licensed. And that leads to sometimes some bad actors. And somebody could have a retort, a fire cremation retort. They could be doing this in their garage. I mean, so when you see like a cremation for $495, run. That's not a good organization to be working with. And this isn't a commodity. So that's the other thing to really think about. You really need an organization that you trust, because even ones that are not $495 can be doing some bad things. We saw that, I think, was it in Montrose or Monument? I always get those two confused. There was a funeral home there that was telling people that she was cremating bodies, but she was selling their bodies and then giving back cat litter and cement. So that's one we had a couple of years ago. And right now, there is a guy in, I think it's in Summit County. This guy owned a bunch of funeral homes and also is the coroner for that area. And he just wasn't taking care of the bodies at all. He was just leaving them. And that's not good. So again, we need to be treating the dead with dignity and kindness and compassion. And so it's really important to use a funeral home that you trust. Questions on what I've talked about so far? Thoughts? Vanessa?
I was just thinking that, I appreciate you explaining, the ecological impact of all these things. It seems like the difference with green burial and then natural organic reduction and alkaline hydrolysis is those last two give something back. So if that's important to you, then the composting option, I know Recompose, has that forest that they're taking the compost to, and Beatree has their farm. So I think that's an important distinction between green burial, which, whatever choice is right for you, it's just there. Whereas the last two you've talked about kind of give something back to the earth, which personally is appealing, but yeah, I appreciate that.
So I was going a different place with you when you said give something back. I thought you were thinking that allows the loved ones to take a part of their dead person with them places versus
both.
Well, I would argue that green burial also is giving back to the earth.
That's true. Yeah, because it's there and what the earth is meant to do anyway. But as far as the bereavement process that you were talking about, for sure, because you get the cremains from the alkaline hydrolysis, from my understanding, is like fire cremation, but you get more of them, and it's like a little bit whiter. And
better
anyway,
looking. That's right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I understand about it is it's a lot less brittle. And so if you've ever seen cremated remains from a fire cremation, you can see kind of big chunks, and you see bone. You're definitely seeing bone, and it's kind of gray. And with this, the bones aren't brittle. And so it's a much finer powder. And you do get a lot more, and it feels pure. So, I do think that is really one of the things that draws people to want to do these things is they like the idea of scattering places. I think that's part of why people used fire cremation, is they like the idea of scattering. And so that really can be a great choice. I do think it's just really, really important that your loved ones get what they know. So like in my tradition, I'm Jewish. Burial is important in my tradition. And it's important to my family. And so I'm going to make that happen. If you come from a family that it's very common to be cremated, it feels right, that's great. And again, it's just stuff that you need to be talking about and thinking about, because what really happens, and Vanessa, as an end-of-life doula, you could speak to this even more. What really happens at the time of a death is it's always shocking. Even when somebody's been sick for years and they're 97 years old, it's still shocking. And we're not in our right minds when somebody dies. And so what often happens is that people get on what I call the path of least resistance, which is almost always fire cremation with no celebration, no communal event around it. They're tired, they're overwhelmed, they can't think. And so they just think there's a dead body, I got to get rid of the dead body. And then they don't get the opportunity to process their loss. And the person who died, if that person wanted something else, they're not going to get it. So I really do believe that the only way to get some of these options is to plan ahead, because otherwise your loved ones will not think about it. They won't know to do it. If you get your plans put in place and paid for today, your loved ones have to make one phone call to say you died. And then the plan gets put into place, whatever meets your values. And if you do want to donate your body, it's super important that you make that plan ahead, because like the anatomical board will not take you after death. They won't allow you to be given to them after death. You have to make the plan with them ahead of time. Somebody put in the chat, what about pets? Quite honestly, I don't know. We're real weird about this in our society. Like, pets and humans are not in the same cemeteries, although sometimes we put people's pets' cremains in their casket. We don't tell the cemetery, quite honestly, you know, it just happens. But it's otherwise it's not, they're not in there. And I don't think that organizations that were doing like alkaline hydrolysis for a human could put a pet in the same vessel. And so there are like different pet organizations. I know there are pet crematories, there are pet cemeteries. You can bury your pet in your backyard. Do that in a green way. So that's what I would say about pets. Jean or Jeannie, I'm not sure how to say your name, please.
It's Jeannie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was curious about, I'm not sure if I understood correctly, about the natural organic reduction. And you said to end up with a truck bed full of compost or whatever. Is you have to start with that, almost that much with the body. I mean, that's not all remains in there. That's the other stuff that you put in, the soil, right, and everything. Oh, okay.
It is, but you can't separate it all is the same. You know, it's all one thing.
But it takes that much stuff around it for the
yeah, the amount of stuff that they're going to put in is going to be based on how much the body weighs and things like that. But yes, you're right. A lot of that is what started, but you can't separate out and say, okay, here's Jamie and here's the wood chips and alfalfa that we started with. It's all compost.
Right. And then so is in the container, I assume, is reused?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the container is reused. Like the one I saw, I mean, it really, when I think about it, it really looked like a chest freezer. It's metal, it's big, it's deep. That's really what it looked like. You know, there's going to be different designs for them. But it's a pretty utilitarian kind of thing.
Well, that's good. I mean, you wouldn't want it to just be used once and thrown away.
Right, exactly. If we're talking about sustainability, that's the best. Yeah, exactly. So I'd love to hear from all of you in learning about this. What sounds like a good choice? What, you know, and if you just want to raise your hands, maybe we'll do it this way. If you were choosing for yourself, what do you think about natural organic reduction? Is that something that you would want if it were available to you? Juliana think so. Anne, thank you. Anybody else think it might be a good choice?
Yeah, I think so.
Great, thanks, Jeannie.
And I have one other question too. Sure. What did you say? What was the name of the company in Colorado that calls it Tree Tea?
Be a Tree.
Be a Tree. Okay, thank you.
And actually, Feldman's partners with them to do alkaline hydrolysis water cremation. And what about the alkaline hydrolysis? Does that appeal to people? Yeah, right. So this is something that we're actually really considering right now. Feldman's is really considering creating a place that we could do natural organic production. It's going to be a big undertaking, and we really want to make sure that it is something that people want. It does feel like it's something that people want. Does it scare you to think about that there's so much compost that comes out? And how would you feel about it getting mixed? Like Vanessa pointed out, that Recompose is taking it to a forest. Would it feel comfortable to you to have it mixed with other people's, again, there's no DNA, but your loved ones being mixed with Anne's loved ones? Does anybody?
I can see you just getting a slew of people having heart attacks. I mean, I think it's beautiful, and I don't care. I'm gone, but I'm years ago. I think it was from Germany. They did a thing at the Natural History Museum where people had voluntarily donated their bodies, and they found a way to preserve it, where you could see the veins in one part, the fat. And there was a lot of people with a huge uproar. So yeah, I think you're going to get both sides for sure.
I'm sure. We don't mind the uproar. We just don't want to build something and nobody wants to use it.
Oh, I love it, but why would I want that as opposed to if Be a Tree is already here?
I don't know. So yeah, does anybody feel like they'd much rather have natural organic production than the alkaline hydrolysis?
I do, just because I like the idea of the compost. I mean, I think that's to me, it's appealing because it's a natural process that's been around for hundreds of years, but it's like evolved. So you're creating something that can give. I mean, I don't know. I'm still torn between green burial and natural organic reduction. Just depending on thinking about my loved ones, if they would want something, tangible to keep and spread.
And what about a tangible place to go, Vanessa?
Yeah, I think that would be even better, honestly. Like if you had a garden that people could visit or something. I don't know. I haven't quite decided yet, because those
But
three
that is
most.
actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the three most ecological options that you described all are kind of appealing to me. So it's really like, gosh, what will my loved ones, feel the most at peace with for me,
So that's really in my mind why I think of green burial as being the best option, because it does give a place to go. If your loved ones want to be buried with you, they can be. And I think we don't know that we're going to need it until it doesn't exist. Like if you were buried in a greenway and nobody ever goes there and nobody needs to, it's no loss. But if somebody needs something and it doesn't exist, that can be a real loss. So I don't know. The other piece of it that I think about is there are some ways to really take our loved ones with us all the time. Like I wear this tie was given to me by actually one of my clients who's a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Bella Zickerman of blessed memory. I wear this all the time. And quite honestly, when I need courage, I hold on to it. And I also wear this necklace, and the diamond was my grandmother's engagement diamond. And my parents gave me this when I graduated from high school, and I never used to wear it. I had this idea that I don't wear gold jewelry. And then in maybe 5 years ago, I started wearing it all the time. And I never take either one of these off now. And they're so important and meaningful to me. And there are really a lot of ways that we can do that with our loved ones, whether they've given us jewelry or not. Like you can have a thumbprint taken from your loved one and put that on a necklace or a keychain or a pocket knife or whatever. And people really do get a lot of comfort, from holding it, from having something tactile. That also is one of the things that I really think about with green burial. The act of shoveling, the act of literally burying our loved ones is really a powerful thing. I mean, it is in my tradition normal, but it's really powerful. I have a friend who buried her mom in Texas. They have a green cemetery that is a conservation easement. And they actually kept her body in her house, in the mom's house, for 3 days. They bathed the body themselves. They dressed her in a shroud. They carried her to the cemetery. They lowered her with ropes. Her brother actually got in the grave to kind of settle her in the grave. And then they physically buried her mom. And it was so powerful and meaningful and important. And she said the best decision they've ever made. And all those things, when we interact with our loved ones, it really is incredibly important for bereavement. What are some other questions or thoughts?
What is the difference in cost between a green and a traditional burial?
So strangely enough, green burial is a lot less expensive than a traditional burial. So you don't need a fancy casket. In a traditional burial, there would be embalming. There would typically be an expensive casket. There would typically be a vault, an expensive vault. And so that's a lot. Like a traditional burial might be $20,000, $30,000. A green burial is probably going to be more in the line of 10 or 12. And then alkaline hydrolysis, water cremation, that's going to be more in the $5,000 range, or it could be less. And that's with a memorial service. Natural organic reduction, I'm thinking when it gets here, it would be in the $5,000 or $6,000 range. But to have somebody go to Washington is probably going to be more, because there's going to be a flight involved and a funeral home on this end involved. So that's going to probably be, I'm guessing, in the $8,000 range. Fire cremation, as I said, could be as cheap as $495, but don't do it. And donating your body to science, you get a free cremation. But don't do it for that reason, because that cremation is pretty darn cheap. Don't do it for that reason. Do it because it's important to you. And when you plan ahead, you can make it very easy to do. First of all, when you plan ahead with somebody like me, you get today's cost for services that are long in the future, hopefully. And if you want to pay for it over time, you can. And the money is held by an insurance product. And so if, God forbid, you die during the time you're making payments, the insurance will pay the balance. And if you move away, it can go with you. So there are really, really, really good reasons to make your decisions, to really think it through, and to get those plans done with the funeral home of your choice. And really look at reviews, talk to people. Only use a funeral home that you know can be trusted. That you know lots of people who've had great experiences with them. And one of the things I really think is important is using a family-owned funeral home versus a national organization. And because a family-owned funeral home is beholden to you and the families they serve, the corporate funeral homes are beholden to stockholders. And you get a very different experience in a corporate funeral home. And there are very few family-owned funeral homes anymore. So it's important to really look and plan. Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about Be a Tree if we have time?
Absolutely. Be a Tree is a new organization. Emily Nelson is the founder and owner. She's lovely. She's a young woman, I think in her early 30s. And she actually worked for one of the corporate funeral homes in marketing. And her mother or stepmother was dying and said, you know, I just want to be a tree. And that's why it's named that. And she just really thought that alkaline hydrolysis was really a great choice. And so she started this company. The vessel that she has is a low pressure vessel, and it takes about 18 hours for the process to be done. There are some that take a couple of hours for the process to be done. So it's just something to know. It wouldn't affect, your family won't be affected by that if that's what you choose. But she's just really lovely, and it's a beautiful space on 7th and Severn. Severn? Is that right? 7th and maybe Severn and Federal. And she's just really lovely, and that's who I've been doing quite a lot of pre-arrangements on water cremation, because I am, as you can hear, pretty anti-fire cremation. And you'd be shocked at how many times people say to me that they don't want to be buried because they're claustrophobic or they're afraid of worms or whatever. And then I say to them, well, how do you feel about fire? And they've really not ever thought about it. It's really funny. We have this very weird relationship with death. And Vanessa and I and a bunch of other people are really trying to change that. So if you would join us in that, we'd appreciate it. Jeannie, do you have another question?
No, I just forgot to take my hand down.
Yeah, thank you. We're almost at the end of our time. Are there any other questions or thoughts or final words?
I would just like to share, I just did a class with Inglewood. It was a Zoom class. Oh no, it was the library. It was the library, because Inglewood has the Mallory Rec Center in Inglewood next week has quite a few classes on legal issues, writing a will, all the stuff that's Zoom and or in person. Somebody might want to check. But, in relating to this, the advanced directive class that I did with a library was really, really valuable. If people are taking notes, I have keyboard issues, so I'm not going to type them, but the two websites that they gave, and they gave us a lot of documentation and paperwork in terms of getting this, and it's definitely connected to how you want to die.
Okay.
Tomorrowschoices.org, all the documents are there. And then the conversationproject.org is if you really need, a really soft approach and how to have a conversation with someone you love about it. It covers that too. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Juliana. And I would really say, it's important to have these conversations and recognize that often our loved ones who we really need to talk about this with are still ingrained in the idea that you're not allowed to talk about this. So it can be hard work. It really can be hard work. And I think to say, I just went to this class, I did this advanced directives class, I love Tomorrow's Choices. Whatever we need, I've been told we need to have this conversation. Please do it. And what also can be really interesting is we might be afraid to bring it up with our parents or whomever. And sometimes what happens is they go, oh my God, I really wanted to talk to you about this, but I was afraid you would be upset. So let's all work on being open to having these conversations because they are so valuable and important. We get to know our own values a lot better. We get to know each other better. So I really encourage you, and I'm so honored that you would join us today. And if I can be helpful to you in the future, I know Jen and Kat will send out my contact information as well. Thanks so much for being here and for being willing to share and ask questions. And I just hope you all will be healthy and well and learning how to come out of our cocoons and figure out the next steps for our lives.
Thank you too, Jamie, for sharing your wisdom.
Pleasure.
Amazing. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank
Can
you. And I also-
Juliana say those two websites again?
It's Tomorrow's Choices, right, is one of them. Oh, we can't hear you. And Malley Senior Center, I think.
Conversation project.
Tomorrowschoices.org are the documents. the conversationproject.org is information on how to handle a conversation with someone about this. And the Mallory Rec Center in Inglewood, that's the location, but it's Inglewood in general that's offering a bunch of classes next week, all related to kind of death and wills and trusts and yada yada. And they're-
Conversation what?
Conversations.org.
Project.
Oh, project. Oh yeah, it's on the chat now.
Five Wishes is another good one. fivewishes.org.
Anything that can open the start on this. And there's also a game that's called Go Wish. That's really great. There are lots of things. We just have to look for them, and we also have to be open. And it's a big challenge because our culture has told us our whole lives, don't talk about this. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.